being those two organizations. So without further ado, Jane and Patti to close us out today. Thank you for being here.
So, Jane, I feel like over the past 30 years we've had a number of brief encounters, but I don't know that we've actually sat and had this kind of conversation. It's certainly not with all of you. But this is a pleasure.
Yes, it's mutual.
Can I just start out by, I'm very much thinking about these questions of impact and inclusion and scale, but I may sometimes refer to those in different ways, and I also, as a writer, I'm also very conceptually interested in these ideas, and so I may be bringing some of those things in. But I was just thinking, because we were talking briefly an hour ago in between speakers and panels, just this moment of thinking about potentially embarking on change, managing change, thinking about another scale that an organization might go to, but also just about becoming, and how an organization that has been in existence for a long time, when you come to that moment of becoming something different, becoming something new, maybe undoing things that you've been doing for a very long time. And we could talk about the example of, moving into the area of restorative justice, for example, or Monument Lab, or working in the area of public health and art. So how does that start to happen within an organization, or for you as the individual leader?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say, for a long time, I worked for the Anti-Graffiti Network. And so when that ended and we became Mural Arts, that was, first of all, it was a surprise. I went to Ed Rendell and I said, I think the city should have an art program. And he was like, good idea. You assume someone's just going to say no, and they say yes. You're like, oh my God. So that was surprising. And then suddenly we were like a pro-art program and not anti-anything. So the big thing for us was we had to invent ourselves. Who were we? And I think the first few years, who we were was we believed deeply in public art and mural art, and we opened our doors to all kids. And, we're sort of, I think my disposition is one of a person who is hyper. If I feel like if I'm standing still, I feel like I'm going backwards. So I sort of I'm go forward. But then I think a couple things happened that were like epiphanies, and I feel like context is everything as it relates to public art and as it relates to life. And so in 2002, 2003, there was a new mayor, John Street, and Estelle Richmond, who's someone whom I have much respect. She eventually went on to work for the Obama administration in HUD, but she was the director of social services. And she believed in an integrated model of government and believed that art should be part of how big departments do business. So she suddenly had me attending meetings, and I saw myself as very low on the food chain, but I was suddenly at a table with people who were big thinkers and had big budgets, right? And it was like, oh my God, how do we get to think about who we could be, but not lose sight of who we had been? So it's like all these years of mural arts, in some way, our value system is very much the same as it was when, it was me and the graffiti writers painting murals in Strawberry Mansion, or Mantua. It was those clues that we got back then about what art can do, that stayed so close to my heart, and the impact on young people and the impact in communities. And so when those opportunities came along, it wasn't like total reinvention. It seemed like an extension, but an important moment. But so I won't make this answer too long, but then I just want to fast forward to going back 8-9 years ago. I think that you look around around the country, you learn from people who had success, you learn from failures, you see why some other programs have not, some other programs like ourselves hadn't succeeded, and I thought, what is it? And at the same time, I felt like I love murals, and I do love murals, but what's muralism now? What is it, what's the future of the genre? The future for us isn't 4,000 more murals, right? Because that's that's an untenable collection to even manage when you think about it. It's yikes. But I think we did the Love Letter Project with Steve Powers, and it was text, and that was so fascinating. And then we started working in other areas and experimenting and taking risks and tapping into sort of the cultural assets of our city, which are profound, and at the same time really growing programmatically. So it was sort of like the desire to stretch without mission creep, right? So the lens, you had to have a very defined lens of who we are, but understanding that we felt there were just limits to the mural, as good as that is, like the programmatic stuff, the stuff around the wall, the thinking around public space and social change, like all those things were like, and are really fascinating to us. And it's sort of this obligation we have to ourselves, to citizens of the city, because we're in part publicly funded. So like are we moving the needle or aren't we? Resonates, it stays with us. And then like to stretch the art form, not for the sake of stretching, but to do that with real integrity.
So the mission, in a way, has remained very, very focused and very concentrated. Maybe some of the processes and the methodologies are in some state of transformation, but it sounds like the mission has been sort of very embodied, very intuitive, and again, very concentrated.
Right, and everything, like in criminal justice. Well, for people, either they're behind bars or coming home or learning, like construction, landscaping, mural making, design, reclaiming civic spaces, getting paid, and then having, but then it's like, for us, it's sort of like that, the part of Mural Arts, like we're sort of like long distance runners, right? Like I remember Sister Mary once said, like she's not really a sprinter, you're a long distance runner. And I'm like, so I feel sort of like a sprinter, but like I got where she was going, right? And so, and I'm sort of, but then I think in all the programs, like we have to structure them so that it is, so that people can stay with us for a long time, that it can be generative, that you could start out in 6th grade with us and end up as a teaching artist or a muralist. So with the criminal justice work and with behavioral health and art education, it's the same thing. It seemed like everyone is involved in public art making of some sort. So it's not like we just woke up and we're a social service agency, but it's like, so there's a coherence there. But then one other thing, it's like I heard this guy speak recently, I don't know, maybe not that recently, maybe a year ago. And he writes about cities. And he said that organizations that live at sort of a nexus of different disciplines, he felt really had a chance to move the needle in the 21st century. And it made me think about, like all those years people would say, are you guys in our program? Are you social services? Are you educate? Like what are you? And I'm like, well, we're sort of the intersection of the public, the private, the social, the civic, the aesthetic. And isn't that okay? It's like, I don't know. I mean, that's a hard question to answer. But do we have to be so defined? I don't think so. I think it's sort of interesting to embrace these areas. Yeah. If you're clear about your goals and your mission. Until I get so wound up.
One of the things that really interests me about scale is when it exists in multiple forms simultaneously. And I've written a lot about time and temporality and ephemerality in public space and duration. And it's also inherently about, kind of issues of scale. But, as I think Daniel mentioned, or it's in the program I worked for the past like 3 or 4 years with an amazing group of people on this, large exhibition on an artist named Mural Arts, and significant book. And I realized, as I was thinking about this conference coming up, that I learned so much about scale from working with Mural and working on this project. The kind of plasticity or elasticity about scale and how it exists in many, many forms. And I was thinking about, like Roberto was talking about scaling out, and I was thinking about, these concentrated models of scale and these dispersive models of scale. But one project in particular that, really resonates for me and I think thousands of people is the Touch Sanitation project that Mural Arts did, which, basically working with 8,500 municipal workers in the Department of Sanitation in New York City, 5 boroughs, enormous, almost unimaginable scale. In order to do this project, where she wanted to meet every single sanitation worker during an 11-month period, well, she didn't really actually at first know how long that would take to do that, but it ended up being about 11 months. But she had to do these amazing drawings, which she called sweeps. This, pre-computer and everything, she sat at her kitchen table, figuring out these drawings about how would you deal with sanitation work 364 days a year, except for Christmas, 8-hour shifts every day, 5 boroughs. How do you get to all of these individuals? So she did these amazing sort of time-space drawings in order to even begin to execute this project. But so it was about this, I mean, thinking about scale in this incredibly expansive way, and yet the other end of the register is that she went up to 8,500 individuals, and she reached out to them, she touched their hand, she looked them in the eye, and with incredible, genuine gratitude said, "Thank you for keeping New York City alive." You know, so I mean that kind of the intimacy of that, and then the kind of grandiose sense of what that project was about. And it's always been, it's so generative for me to be thinking with that kind of
Right. So I want to ask you, so do you think, like, if she had done it with less people, what would that have meant? Like, so the scale of that?
Well, I mean, I think it was just what it was at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, that was sanitation work in 1977, 78, and it was, you know, there were 8,500 employees. Now I think there were like well over 10,000. Also, they were all men. I mean, all except, you know, the people who were out in the field collecting, you know, the garbage were all men at that time. Now, of course, that's not the case.
Right.
But, you know, so it was sort of just whatever was happening at that moment was what the project was.
But there was something about it that was so stirring. I mean, I remember thinking about that project because of its both sort of intimacy and that it was grand too. It was both. And we did this project. It's at Broad and Spring Garden. I'm sure people in the audience know. Meg Sullivan has a beautiful 8-story mural. It's across the street, though. It's all joined hands visions of peace. And we did it when there was a spike in juvenile violence. And it's on 400 sheets of parachute cloth and was painted by literally thousands of people in the city. You know, moms, people who had a loved one in prison. It was painted by the men in our class at Graterford. I mean, it was painted all over. And I remember there was a visiting artist, Peggy Diggs. She had come down, she was doing this project with us.
I love the milk carton project.
Oh, me too. And she just said, this is intimacy in a public space.
Yeah.
And I just felt like, oh, that's so interesting, because we hadn't intentionally set out to do that, but I just thought, what are those moments when you can sort of reach people even though the scale is really grand, and the ambition, and I think for Mural, the ambition was grand too. Also, I was really taken by that. I think as someone, like, I'm a city employee, like at Mural Arts, there are like 50-something employees, and like 10 of us are city employees. So we all feel sort of like public servants. So how do you really work effectively with the city? How do you infiltrate in? How do you sort of like partner with not even infiltrate, it doesn't have to be like secret, but it's like, how do you like really, like I'm a spy. Like how do you really create these robust partnerships where it's sort of value added? And I think it was sort of stunning. And I remember when we started to work with the streets department, like I was like thinking about that project. It really resonated really deeply with me.
Yeah, and I mean, often you're imagining it and inventing it as you're doing it. I mean,
Right.
Just, you know, at one moment, Norman Steisel, the commissioner of sanitation at the time, and Merrill just said, well, what about having an artist in residence in sanitation?
Right.
You know, and then we'll figure it out.
But in a
What that
way,
actually means, what that looks like, and 40 years later, if they sort of
look, I know, and that's so great. But like, I wonder, it's like if you're doing that, like I think my temptation is to go big, because you're trying to do a number of things at the same time. There's impact on constituents, there's impact on space, and there's impact on sort of the issue. Like, so it's art as advocacy, education, there's art, the Graterford, it's about redemption, it's about, you know, changing people's lives, it's about all these things. So you have to sort of be cognizant of this multitasking. And really, I mean, the world is so afraid. It's like, I feel this huge responsibility to whatever project we are taking on to sort of think about scale. I think it sort of hovers over our heads.
Yeah. I mean, this notion of place, I think, has come up a lot over the past day or two as well. And again, this notion of dispersive and maybe more peripatetic ways of thinking about scale. And I don't know if these are actually really great examples, but Paul Ramirez Jones's Keys to the City, which, you know, has obviously been an influence for probably a number of people in the room, but this notion of these bestowal ceremonies where you're given a single key that then unlocks, you know, however many 24 or 25 doors somewhere in the city of New York. But again, a very sort of small scale gesture that actually, you know, expands into this very peripatetic and kind of self-guided, self-initiated, you know, experience of the city. Or, you know, a project, and I don't know if Nato is still here, but it was, you know, part of an exhibition that he curated with Glenn Shillette a number of years ago at Mass MoCA called The Interventionists, and William Topel's Black Factory, the notion of people bringing in what I think Topel would characterize as these racialized objects that then get collected and analyzed and either kind of created, you know, become part of the Black Factory. But then it became this peripatetic project that moved nationally around the country and really playing with this, again, kind of very interesting register of scales. And maybe one other example might be Mel Chin's. I know he's going to be part of Monument Lab, but you know his Fundridge project, which is also another way of thinking about scale. You know, the intimacy of I mean, first of all, the epidemic of high lead levels on the one hand, certainly in his case focusing in New Orleans, but the you know, creating these fundraisers, creating this kind of alternative currency with children around the country in order to kind of leverage congressional action, you know, in terms of this public health crisis. So it's this notion of place and scale, but also how scale becomes something, you know, almost less concrete, but again, about motion, about mobility,
about vision, actually,
yeah.
The scale of vision.
And inclusive in terms of having other
Right.
people participating in some kind of endeavor, some kind of
Yeah, because
purpose.
I think, right, exactly, because people want a stake in it, you know, and I think some of our, like, we've had like a number of like citywide projects, even in our behavioral health work, to be honest. Part of the mandate when we first met with the mental health commissioner like 10 years ago, and he expressed interest, he said, you know, he wanted to use art to overcome the stigma around a range of mental health issues, trauma, addiction. And he said, you know, and he was very practical. Like he said when people hear behavioral health, they just go away. Like people feel they've gotten bad services or no services in the city. So he felt like people might feel safer if they were involved in a public art project. And so he just took a risk in working with us. But I think he also wanted us to open the doors and invite other people. It's sort of us and them. It's so much like, you know, the divisions are ever present in our society. And how do you sort of, like, who amongst us hasn't struggled or suffered or has dark days or whatever? And it's just, he wanted to sort of see that lifted. And so Porch Light is our work with the Department of Behavioral Health, but really it's our work with the city. And I think what's so interesting is we have this study from the Yale School of Medicine, and it's a very official study, but, you know, so we have real data that talks about the impact. But then there's sort of I think the data that's out there that hasn't been collected, and that's what we see at paint days or community days when those doors are open and people get to have this really incredible exchange. And you can sort of, the work has this uncanny ability to shine a light on diversity within a commonality, so that there's like the construct is broad, right? But then the issues maybe are a little more intimate and poignant and personal, but something else is going on, and it's that issue of scale. And then to see that there's sort of this interest in Porch Light around the country, and so it's what's happening here sort of percolating and showing up in other spaces. And also I just think generally that artists are so inventive and creative and wonderful that the way they're going to think about an issue is going to be different than other people. And that's why some of the commissioners that have believed in our work, I just commend them, because they understand that our traditional interventions, they just are going to fail us. They're going to fail us along the way, and it is the role of innovation, creativity. It's the artists sometimes that are going to come in and shine a light on something that no one had ever considered. And I think that is the energy that sort of drives us forward, you know, because it's like, there are, you know, almost every day there's like a discovery, and that is sort of incredibly sort of rewarding.
Yeah. Some of the changes that are ongoing or underway right now in Mural Arts, and do you, I mean, do you think of this as you say, unless you're moving forward, you feel like you're, not.
I'm like very neurotic.
Is this another kind of moment within the sort of the wonderful lifespan of this organization where you're actually having time to kind of rethink or recalibrate or research in a way that you haven't had it, maybe when you were doing years and years of painting murals and doing these, amazing projects throughout the city? Is this another moment for you to engage in a kind of reconnaissance in a different way and maybe think about impact or inclusion in a different way with these different modalities that you're now doing?
Oh, I think so. I think they've all, absolutely. But because I think, like, first, when we became Mural Arts, really the truth is, like, the city would monitor us about our output. So it was like, okay, like, I remember, like, Wilson Good, who I really like a lot, but there would be like these press conferences all the time, and they'd be like, we cleaned up 50,000 properties, and how many murals were created? We'd be like, 20, 30, 40, 50, and we'd be like, it's going everywhere. And then when we became Mural Arts, it was like, wow, this is like we're working at a very rapid pace, we should slow down. So, and then the work got more complicated, and so, but there was like a pressure, but then the pressure sort of went away. But then it was like, then we had that epiphany around, whenever that was 8, 9, 10 years ago. Now I think, I think we're an organization, like we've become sort of, I think like to be, like it's okay to be self-reflective, to course correct, to sort of to take criticism. I mean, like I'm sort of I can get defensive. Like I'm like more like I wanted to be a lawyer. I was an artist and thought about being a lawyer, so I can be very adversarial, but I just can calm down really quickly and listen. So it's sort of like I sort of get wound up and unwind. So I feel like we're like looking at things going on around the country, around the world. Look at our extraordinary colleagues here in this city. So it's like I think we're learning. We've built in opportunities, something called Mural Lab, the symposium that we do with more, like ways to learn and grow. We're hiring a senior curator. It's like we're doing things to sort of to take stock of this moment and look at what we've learned and how do we grow, but it should be smart growth because, you don't want to just keep growing for the sake of growing. It's like, so you're going to hear in me someone who's pretty conflicted about scale, right? Because there's the scale, like you want just big vision, you want to be aspirational. On the other hand, we want to be practical, pragmatic, and you want to be effective. So what does it mean to be effective? And I think that's what we need to think about right now. And I think we've gotten to the point where we sort of feel like there's a broader definition about what we're doing and who we are, and that is a great thing, and it's also a big responsibility. It's like a challenge, a responsibility, and a moment, and what are the decisions that we're going to make? How are we going to define our body of work every year? It'll be part temporary, part permanent, part conceptual. It'll be connected in some ways to our programmatic work. So there's part of me that's wants to think about it slowly, practically. Like we have a COO, Joan Riley, and she's very planful, which is really good because I'm not at all. Like it's just not, like people say strategic plans, I'm like, oh, I feel like my back starts to ache. But I also know, I'm not, this is like, so we're good like combo plate, right? So I want to be really smart about where we're going because let's face it, like, eventually, I won't be at Mural Arts, and what you want Mural Arts to be, like, sustain itself for many, many years. And so we have to be really thoughtful. But part of me feels like, oh my God, I'd like to grow the restorative justice program like 10 times. Like, why 100 people? It should be 500 people. Look how art impacts people's lives. That's my tendency, like, to go out. But then I also understand the complexity of that. Because you don't just want to say, okay, we're going to serve 50,000 kids in mediocre ways. No! Stop! Like, there's too much mediocrity, right? So you can see I have two minds on this.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, the impact does have a lot of pressure because you do see it in terms of the number of people that could potentially have value, experience value, have benefit.
Yeah.
So trying to get away from that, it's almost like a metric-driven
Yes, exactly.
process.
But I want to say, I think too, the other thing that's happened over the last number of years is we've done some really interesting projects that have been tremendous learning. There's been moments of learning for us. And I think, actually, someone, I think it was Denise, mentioned risk. I think it's really important to take risk. I think smart risk you want to do. But, and I think if you fail, then you learn from it. But you can't not do that, right? Because to me, that would be just unacceptable. And I think that surely if we aspire, all of us here today, people on other panels, to move the needle in some way, we have to do that, and we have to think about issues of scale, and we have to think about the integrity of the work. How do we, I mean, I keep coming back to that, how do we do it well, so that you really feel, like I feel like, I guess I do feel, like if I feel like in my next life I'd like to run for office, like I feel really responsible to people in this city. Like when I wake up in the morning and have like angst about like how do we do this, how do we do it better, how do we work with more artists, how do we provide opportunities for artists, how do we pay artists well, how do we work with constituents, how do we, and that's what drives us to work in Kensington or work in South Philly or work, whatever issue is on the desk of the mayor and city council, that needs to be an issue that we're thinking about. And bringing artists into that thinking. And the work should always, you use the word generative, like everything we're doing should lead to something else. So if Katerina Grossa comes here and does 8 miles of color along the Amtrak corridor, she has a Berlin team, but we also have a Philly team. And then it ends up that some of the people who worked on that project get an opportunity to go somewhere else, and then something else happens. We should be able to have a giant diagram of all the people that have passed through the doors of Mural Arts and have gone on to do other things. Someone said to me recently they were talking about a couple artists who are doing work in other places. They're like, does that bother you? I'm like, bother me? Why would, that is a victory. That is like the best thing ever. That there are artists like out there working, either here in Philly or around the world, who have nothing to do with Mural Arts. That's great that we did it. Then that means something happened that was right.
That's success. I remember there's a wonderful collaborative group team, Kate Erickson and Mel Ziegler, and I wrote about their work quite frequently, and they were, I think just remarkable artists, and that was their thing. No, we don't do this, but we're so happy that somebody else does this.
Right.
This is what we're doing, and this is so exciting that these other artists are doing these things. It was a very It was an incredibly generous way of seeing one's practice and
that
impact
scale
on the
too.
world. Yeah.
Right? It's like that scale, that vision, that
Yeah.
you start here and then it grows out. That's really exciting.
But thinking about it, like Katerina Gross, we had talked about this on our phone call, but just this, now I'm probably talking about scale in a different way, but this notion of like, there's something, I mean, the scale of that project and the fact that it was probably most often seen from the train, right? So it has almost a kind of cinematic quality as you're moving by it. And then in contrast, I think about like some of the murals in close to my neighborhood or whatever that are they feel very local and they're pedestrian based, right? I see them when I walk my dog and things like that. So again, like these other kind of registers of scale and how intentional is that in terms of you're thinking about trying these different things or trying these different kinds of experiences.
Yeah, I think both are of equal importance. I'm really reminded, I want to get back to Katerina, but just want to bring up something like, we have a restoration program. And it's really hard because some murals should just go to mural heaven. I mean, they've done a good job, right? And
why remember, why can just
right, exactly. And back in the day, like the city gave us mostly beige paint and big brushes. So that was like a winning formula. I was like, I don't know. But then we got a variety of house paint, not just beige. And then finally, when we became Mural Arts, we got mural paint. But the old murals are fading.
Yeah.
But when you want to take them away, it's really hard because people love them.
Yeah, like how do you say that? You're part of the restoration project, or no, you're really not.
Oh gosh, there are people around the city just really mad because they're like, no, you're not, and they were like, what? They're like, you cannot take this away till you sign that you're going to do a new one. So, but there's something beautiful about that too. So I think it's because it's what you're saying. So there's pedestrian level, and more often than not, communities were involved in the process. So they're very personal and meaningful. And we were sort of like a notion of co-creation and co-collaboration. That's from back then. When Julio Lopez and I were talking about this yesterday, we were sort of the original like social practice artists, right? Because there was no name for it. We were just like sort of talking to people about the work, which had a certain power, I think, and magic. And I never want to get away from that totally, because I think that's so important. I think that any citizen in the city of Philadelphia can wake up, and if they want art, they can call us in their neighborhood. They think that's something great. The fact that we have a waiting list of thousands of people who want murals, like, what does that say? Like, there's something percolating that is, like, fantastic. Now, of course, the demand exceeds our ability to do it, and we need to think about that. So I think the small scale, but where there's deep investment is important. And then I think projects like when Lucy and Jorge Orta came in and we had the big dinner in front of City Hall for 1,000 people about access to healthy food, or Katarina's project, or open source, or the Philly painting project that we did with the Village of Arts and Humanities, where we wrap color around 61 buildings, or something. That kind of scale is like a B12 shot. So that's, and Monument Lab is giant, right? It's like so many, it's like, oh, it makes me nervous, but it's exciting. So I think both are really important. And the thing is that sometimes they do both. Like Caterina Grosso, that color went through, it went by there's a beautiful community garden around Glenwood Avenue, I want to say Germantown Glenwood, but I think that my address is wrong. But we had to meet with the community gardeners. And so we were showing them Caterina's work. And they were like, well, this doesn't really look like a Mural Arts mural. And I was like, well, because there's no real Mural Arts mural, we've been doing all these things. And they're like, okay, well, so in a sense, we had this history with the gardeners because we knew them from way back when. And so they took a chance, and then they just loved it. There's like a warehouse, it's like orange. And so and then think, how do you define community? That is such a great question. Is it the people who live there, bike by, sit on the bus bench and wait for the bus? I mean, people who are, it's such an intriguing question because there's an answer and there's not. But so for Katerina, it was the pedestrians. It was the people who take the train. It was the people at 30th Street Station. So we talked to a lot of different people, knowing that in the end, some people would go, oh my God, those trees are pink. What is going on? And some people would say, oh, this is poetry. And sort of be okay with that.
Well, there's maybe the intentional public and the accidental public.
The accidental public, right? And like you had said that before, and I thought that was so interesting. Yeah, the accidental public, like when we had the big dinner in front of City Hall, there were the people who had bought a ticket or won a ticket with the lotteries, but then there were all these skateboarders came, and another group came. It was like, okay, we have extra food, everybody can join. So, but that was and then everyone was talking about access to healthy food. And I was like, are people really going to talk about access to healthy food? I was like, is this going to work? And then it worked. And it was like, oh my God, it's great.
So just a thought about impact, and then we're going to, we'd love to include the rest of you in the conversation, but I think this is totally apocryphal, but again, I write a lot about temporary art as well, and I think there's a really interesting place for that in the public realm, and Christoph Wojtyszko, who's over the years done many, many different projections, often still projections, video projections, often just for a single night, maybe for a few nights, but always the night side of things, they have to happen in the dark, but I remember it's been attributed to him that he said that the real project begins when the projectors are turned off.
See,
and everybody carries with them this amazing sort of memory or experience of the event, whether they experience it serendipitously or they plan to go there.
Yes, we did this project with Mijin Light Drift with these orbs in the river. It was 3 days. And it was like it loomed large in people's memories. And when we talk about the temporary nature of murals, murals are just not here forever. As much as I might like some of them to be, but the memory of them should be so powerful that we yearn for more. That's what we want. We want art in public space.
Please join us if you feel so inclined.
No questions? You guys feel very tired. The question! Yay!
Hi. I'm just wondering, Patti, maybe you could talk a little bit about how an art school fits into this in terms of your thinking, as a thing in itself that has scale and generates new programs and projects
Yeah.
and educates people?
I think a lot, yeah, thank you for that question. You know, I've been in academia such a long time that I don't even know how to talk about it. I don't even identify as a long-term academic here, but I think about scale all the time at schools, and I think I always have, although I didn't know it at first. You know, I began my academic life, and I kind of backed into academia inadvertently, and ended up being in an architecture program at Parsons in the New School, and have just gone on and worked at various different schools. One school with 40,000 students, and now I'm in a college that has about 400 students. So it's talking about shifts in scale. But I've always been interested in this notion of sort of concentration and expansion, and how you play with that dynamic at schools, and how you have those moments of exceptional and extreme focus and inquiry and research that are, you know, such, you know, really have such profound impact on students, hopefully, and also on the faculty who engage in those sort of collaborative moments of inquiry with students. But I've always been really deeply interested in the partnering that gives another sense of scale and complexity to what a school can be, and how you can do that kind of pivoting as a school and identify those cultural partners, or those maybe different academic partners that kind of allow you to think in a different way. And again, those can sometimes be very long-term. I was at Rhode Island School of Design before I came to Moore, and our neighbor, our great partner is Brown University. We did so much together, Judith, as you know. And I mean, I worked with graduate students in the School of Public Health and in programs at RISD to look at ideas of food deserts and food access, and how do you think about designing cities to make them more friendly for walking and bicycling, and all the different ways that keep the people healthy or more inclined to be out in the city and engaging in the city. So I think, you know, I love that sense of how schools can be incredibly sort of concentrated. But I mean, I do think that the pedagogy that we're engaged in, I mean, really, I think I'm not entirely a sort of post-studio person, but I think the studio has its constraints and limitations, and I think there can be a notion of practice that looks beyond and above that. Like, it can be a point of, the studio needs to be a point of departure. It can then be a point of return, but it always has to be about departures as well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You had a question? Did you?
Hi, Jane. Thank you. I'm wondering if there are more projects around sculpture and installation coming, as much as there are murals, and whether that's a direction that Mural Arts might take more of.
Yeah, well, certainly for Monument Lab, there are many installations, and we're really very excited about that. And beyond that, I mean, there's so, like I just had a meeting yesterday, we're doing these hub spaces now where we take over empty storefronts, and there are artist residency programs going on. So in Tacony, we're about to work with this fabulous light artist and then an amazing photographer. So it's really sort of expansive. So sort of surely some things will be more sculptural, although I don't see us creating like a lot of big objects that would be permanent. I mean, that would be more like 1% for art would do that, I think. But sculpt things that are sculptural for sure. And I do think that we're, I would say, generally interested in work in public space, period. So, and that will take lots of different forms. And look, next week, I hope you come. Michael Rakowitz is doing this incredible performance next Saturday night at Independence Mall, working with veterans who've come back from fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, and working with the Iraqi refugee community, and it's all about displacement and resilience. And then we're doing a 10-part radio series with Prometheus Radio and PRI. So I think why Mural Arts and the radio, and Michael Rakowitz said it really beautifully. He said this is public art on the public airwaves. And I'm like, oh, I love that. So, but because there's, you know, what I think is happening that's really interesting is that these genres of public art making, it used to be you had graffiti, street art, muralism, public art, right? And they were pretty siloed. And they were just didn't really talk to each other, and that's really changed. And then with the advent of like social practice and people embracing that, I think public art making is just really an interesting space to be in right now, especially when you start looking at it through a social lens. I feel like potential. That was a long-winded answer. So yes, we will be experimenting and working in lots of disciplines.
You were striking as a person who ever says no.
I like never say no. It drives people at Mural Arts crazy. Like I said, we were coming back from the convening, coming back from Tyre, and I'm like, oh, we need to go to 15th and Carpenter because Days is here. Oh, Days is like this really well-known graffiti. You know who he is, right? This graffiti guy. But he's like Days did all the subway cars, and I've never met him. And the person who runs our project management office is like, what? It was so good. She was so surprised. And I was like, yes, I snuck it in. I know I shouldn't, but it's like, I can't help myself. I like hardly ever say no. Because I don't like it when people say no to me. When people say no to me, I'm like, go left, go right, go around them. Strategize quickly.
So, Jane, sorry, I'm over here. I talked to you a little bit briefly over there, in the coffee station or whatever. So coming from a border town, like I see so much potential and interaction between like projects in Mexico that interact with projects in America, for example, right? Or so it's like, how do you begin? Because Mural Arts has their own process, a process that, down south, we're still painting directly on the wall, we're not pasting or anything. So it's like, I've really grown interested in the idea of community work, but it's like, how do you form this community within a space that hasn't been touched, by a lot of community, or it's more collective based versus bringing the community together to paint a mural, for example, So it's like, how do I get people to come together to paint or engage, how does that process begin?
Well, I think, it's interesting because you and I were chatting. We just got this grant from a foundation in New York to replicate our practice in other cities. So this week we were in Detroit and Memphis. And I think the thing is we need to be really careful about not being prescriptive or didactic, that you just have to meet people where they are, because really we just want to help build capacity and provide support, and really this should be part of a larger field building thing that we're doing. And so I think that, every city is different. And so, but my recommendation always is going to be to try to take the bigger view, talk about scale, and to think about trying to build a coalition of people from government, if that's possible, from the private sector and artists, and to try to build like a power center so that the work can be sustained beyond one project. So that's why, I think it's really good. So we're creating like an institute, and we're going to have, part of that will be like having a laboratory, an innovation center here in Philly, where it'll be like panel discussions, lecture space for conversation around public art and social practice. So I would say to you, the more when you go back to sort of research, who are the nonprofits? Who are the people who would be interested in this? Are there people from government? And then if you get back to us on who that is, then we can work through these things with you very sort of strategically, so that we can try to figure out how can we bring together a group of people. It's not even like learning parachute cloth and all the methodology. That's easier. Like the trick here is going to be how do you build a group of advocates for this really critical process. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have time for one or two more questions, and we'll collect them if there's more than one.
Thank you. This was very engaging and lively. My comment is about a concept that comes out of, I think, what I heard Jane sort of mention as, you're talking about having this dinner and saying, everybody's welcome, and it was kind of a sort of side comment, but I think it's a really deep sort of philosophy about doing the work, and it's something that I heard echoed yesterday in the reformative justice panel when the three presenters who had been in the Guild program talked about this feeling included, that being in this program was a way of, after the dramatic experience of exclusion that is being incarcerated or even being in solitary confinement, this sense of feeling welcome, you know, and how does one participate, whether it's, you know, making an image in an art program, or whether it's, you know, learning life skills to apply for a job, like the ways in which we are able to learn to show up, but also that when doing so, that we're received and someone says, like, you're welcome in this program. And the concept, I think, it reminds me of notions of radical hospitality, of saying, like, there is a table and we want you here. You know, and I think as an ethic, that's a really powerful ethic for an organization, which then is offset by, you know, a deputy director who's strategic and says, you know what, if we really want to do that well, we have to cap it at X number, or, you know. But in theory, we must believe that we are making a kind of infinite table at which everyone is welcome. And, you know, if we can't do it, then we empower somebody else in another city to get it done in the way that they can, suitable for their community.
It's beautifully said. I think, you know, it just strikes me like our restorative justice program, they might have said this yesterday, has like a 12 to 15% recidivism rate. It flies in the face of the national average and the state average, which is much higher. So what is it? This is not brain surgery. It is like up to society to muster the political and social will to do the right thing on behalf of citizens. This isn't work that marginalizes people. It is work that respects people, that sees the potential in everyone, and we are not an ambivalent employer, right? Everybody we approach people with love, and yet there are high expectations. And when people are out in public space doing this work, transforming our civic assets, which have sometimes just deteriorated over the years, then it's like people are going, oh my God, this is so beautiful, thank you so much. And then the fact that there's a jobs developer on staff, and there's a care and attention to people's lives. And it's like when I go, and like I always feel like, so, you know, we made it through all 5 different mayors, which is good, right? But you always feel like it's sort of Groundhog Day. It's like we're talking about it all over again, about the power of art. It's like, all right, enough. It's like white noise. Don't you get it? There is something going on here that is important, that has significance. And so that's when I want to just scale it right up. But because I feel like it's effective, and it takes into account people's assets. It's like when I first started, the best thing that could have happened to me was going out to Graterford Prison. Because first I was like, oh no, should we not, it's far, it's this, it's that. I heard the little voices in my head. And I learned so much from the men out there. They're like, our lives went dark at age 10. Like, we're just like feel invisible. And then you look at their art and it's beautiful. And they're self-taught, and they've been drawing from comic books, some of them, since they were young. And it's like, oh my God, look at this talent. Like, I've had privilege in my life. What if I didn't? Where would I be? And we're so quick to judge instead of embrace, right? Instead of inviting people in. And that is what we want to do. Because when we do, we see what happens. This kind of beauty. You heard the voices of Jesse and Russell yesterday, and Dewan. I mean, they're just like so full of inspiration. And that force, that's what just drives us to want to just keep moving forward. And that's a part of us that's like advocacy all the time, and case making, because we believe that it's working.
Can I ask one quick question? Because, you know,
Oh,
we
was
talk
that-
a lot about leadership at Moore, and you are just, you know, such an impassioned cultural leader. Do you feel that you have a role and responsibility to help nurture and educate future leaders in this field?
I do, and I do feel that. I feel it, and I feel it a lot more recently, and I feel like I'd like to do something more about it. Like, I feel like, oh, I've sort of dropped the ball there, I should do more. So I do teach at Penn, and I like teaching here, but I'm not like it can't be like, I don't like have an official title for it or anything, you know what I mean? But I think unofficial, I don't, maybe if anyone has an idea, but if, but I feel like I definitely would like to do that. And people
I mean, you
often,
already are doing it,
Well-
Jane, just because you're setting a great example, but I mean, I just wonder how much you would have
Oh.
intentionally thought about that.
well, nonprofit people, it's like nonprofit leaders will call me sometimes and say,
Yeah.
can I have coffee with you? And could you just like talk some things through? And I, of course, never say no. But I think that's important. And I was actually thinking that it might be interesting to convene from time to time some of the nonprofit arts organizations in the city just to talk about what are the issues. Like, how can we help each other? Is there any way that Mural Arts could, be helpful in this? I mean, just because I do think that's so important, and I think it's critical in Mural Arts to think about the next generation of leadership, and who's the generation of leaders coming up in our city who are going to help change the world.
Well, let's do those things in order.
Okay, great. Sign me up.